Nazi Germany entered World War II economically underpowered. Hitler's regime had no ready treasure chest reparations from World War I, and the Depression had left. Germany strapped for hard currency and reserves, yet from 1939 to 45, the Nazis waged a global war. They financed this on a shoestring through a mix of clever accounting and brutal exploitation. Internally, they hid costs off budget and squeezed the home economy with debt, taxes, bonds, and outright price controls. Externally, they ransacked Europe and beyond, looting occupied countries, seizing Jewish assets, forcing payments and new currencies, and extracting labor. By war's end, Germany was drowning in hidden debt, yet the Nazi leadership had bought time and guns with these methods. This article details the tools of that finance machinery, the men behind them from Jomar Schacht to Walther Funk, and the massive economic toll they exacted. Long before war broke out, Nazis used creative debt instruments to build armaments without showing it in the budget. In 1934-38, Hjalmar Schacht, Hitler, as Reichsbank president, implemented the Mefo bill scheme. A dummy company, Mefo, issued promissory notes to armaments contractors. These bills were guaranteed by the state, could circulate as currency, and could be redeemed at the Reichsbank for cash at 4% interest. In effect, they were interest-bearing money, a parallel currency that funded rearmament off the books. Tens of billions of RM were created this way. Estimates range into the dozens of billions, without immediately triggering inflation. The scheme worked until 1938, at which point, Schacht, concerned about its inflationary pressure, clashed with Hitler and resigned, but its legacy remained. Germany entered the war with much of the cost of rearmament already hidden as unpaid bills and state obligations. By 1939, the Nazi state was deeply in debt even before hostilities began. A secret budget deficit of roughly 6 billion RM was covered by short-term Reichsbank loans and new bonds rather than by honest accounting. One emergency plan in late 1938 even resorted to limited money printing, 300, 400 million RM to bridge the gap. Hitler was wary of letting the public see this, fearing it would seem like financial panic. Closing parentheses. In short, the Third Reich entered World War II on the brink of financial collapse, a situation that forced it to finance the war differently from a democratic power. Price controls and rationing. To stretch resources, the Nazis ran a command economy. Consumer prices and wages were fixed, and civilian goods were heavily rationed. This stored up inflationary pressure. The money in people's hands could not chase scarce goods. Indeed, official price indices rose only about 12% from 1939 to 44, despite the huge money printing. But hidden inflation emerged in black markets for food and supplies. These controls in effect channeled economic output into the war machine. A 1943 Reich budget secret report showed 82% of central government spending was for with civilian spending squeezed to 18%. In sum, Germans paid with heavy taxation and consumer austerity, while official price curbs kept the war economy afloat, forced labor and economic mobilization. Internally, wage caps and compulsory labor reduced costs. Women and youth were drafted into war production instead of being paid market wages. More brutally, from 1942 onward, Fritz Sauckel organized the importation of foreign and POW labor to replace German men sent to the front. By late 1944, 7.5 million foreign laborers and POWs were in the Reich, roughly 1/5 of the civilian workforce. These workers were paid scantily or not at all, dramatically lowering labor costs and freeing German workers from military roles. In agriculture and armaments, the share of foreign POW labor reached 20 to 30% by 1944. This MASS slave labor functioned as a hidden subsidy. By exploiting occupied populations' labor, Germany sustained production it could not otherwise afford. From the very first invasions, Hitler's Germany extracted wealth from conquered lands to pay for the fight. The occupied economies of Europe, though collectively twice the size of Germany's own, provided a surprisingly large subsidy to Berlin's war chest. Historian Eng Clemen notes that even as Germany's armaments factories roared, Hermanitaped occupied Europe for a significant portion of its war cost. For example, economists estimate that the conquered territories contributed an amount equivalent to 40% of Germany's normal tax revenue. Notably, France alone supplied 42% of those occupation revenues. In concrete terms, From 1944, France was forced to pay approximately 100 billion francs in monthly deliveries, payments and loans to the Reich. In sum, external funding was plunder on an epic scale. As Clement notes, whenever a country fell, Berlin immediately set about looting its economy. The mid-war successes over Poland, France, and others gave Nazi Germany a temporary margin. Occupied Europe provided a large subsidy, perhaps a quarter of the war costs. But this came at terrible cost. War production in Poland and USSR collapsed. Scorched earth policies invited guerrilla resistance, and by 1944 even looted resources ran short as the Eastern Front drained everything. Several Nazi leaders played central roles in this finance regime. Hjalmar Schacht, president of the Reichsbank, 192330, 1933-39. And Hitler's early economics minister, Schacht engineered the Mefo bills and balanced budgets in the 1930s. He famously told the Reichsbank in 1938 that Germany could be near bankruptcy if deficits continued. Schacht clashed with Hitler over inflation and resigned in January 1939. After the war, he was acquitted of war crimes, arguing he had tried to restrain militarism. Hermann Göring, as Minister of Aviation and Four-Year Plan overseer, Göring dictated war economy priorities. He oversaw the Aryanization profits, e.g. After Kristallnacht, part of the proceeds of selling Jewish businesses funded Göring's office. He also set industrial targets and price controls. Göring famously accepted large lumps of gold, including from Jewish victims, in personal jewelry. Walther Funk, a Nazi loyalist who became Minister of Economics 1938-45, and Reichsbank President 1939-45. Funk inherited Schacht's duties. Under Funk, the Reichsbank increasingly financed deficits by printing money. Funk was complicit in looting. In 1944, he reported covering war spending by seizing unused currencies and other assets. At Nuremberg, he claimed he was a dupe, but was convicted of war crimes for his financial manipulations, though not given the death penalty. Albert Speer, appointed Minister of Armaments and War Production in 1942. Speer centralized the plunder. He organized the systematic shipment of factories and forced labor from the occupied East to Germany. Speer also reformed the economy to improve efficiency and output, the armaments miracle, but largely within the same exploitative framework. Fritz Sackel, as General Plenipotentiary for Labor from 1942. Sackel orchestrated the deportation of millions of foreign workers into the Reich. Though not a financier per se, his actions sharply cut German labor costs, effectively financing production by enslaving others. Economic consequences: the Nazi finance system imposed severe distortions. Wartime Germany suffered extreme shortages of consumer goods. Germans endured strict rationing, with purchasing power falling as real wages stagnated. The regime's policies masked underlying inflation. Official statistics showed only a 12% rise in the cost of living from 1939 to 44. That belied shelves and thriving black markets. By 1945, the economy was on the brink of collapse. Public and quasi-public debt reached astronomical levels. The Reich's obligations, bonds, bills, clearing debts totaled around 450 billion RM. Approximately 15 the 1939 budget. The Reichsmark had been debased. The final issue of emergency bills, Reichsgesetzskein, flooded the market. In fact, in the last months, inflationary printing went out of control, and black market prices skyrocketed. The summer 1944 Nero decree, orders to destroy factories, signaled the economy's endgame. There was literally nothing left worth keeping intact. Post-war analysis tools, Overy, Eichholz, conclude that Germany's war economy was largely unsustainable. Keynesian war theory would normally recommend bonds and taxes, but Nazi Germany avoided public bonds to prevent any vote on the war. Instead, it relied on coercive finance, debt, plunder and force, which bought time, but ultimately consumed the country's future. In the end, the economic strengths that had helped Hitler's rise as skilled workforce, industrial capacity, were hollowed out or destroyed. The Third Reich's financial house of cards collapsed under Allied advance, leaving Germany devastated and bankrupt by 1945. Internally, the Nazi regime mined every available source to fund the major methods included bank borrowing and silent war bonds. Unlike WWI, the Nazis did not hold public bond drives or patriotic bond campaigns. The regime turned to banks and silent loans instead. Starting in 1939, German commercial banks were essentially forced to lend to the government. They exchanged deposits for short-term Reichskriegsgeschenks, war, treasury notes, or other promissory notes. In practice, this quietly converted 40 million bank and investment accounts into government bonds. Thus, the Reich had a continuous supply of money from the banking system without rallying citizens to buy bonds publicly. Even occupied Czechoslovakia, a central bank was compelled to buy German bonds. By about 70% of Czech bank investments were in Reich bonds. In effect, German bankers underwrote the war. Debt and budget-busting deficits. Public expenditures skyrocketed. Central government spending grew by 5 from 1939 to 1945. Far outstripping revenues, debt ballooned. Reich debt rose from 31 billion RM in 1939 to roughly 377 billion RM. By spring 1945, over 12-fold, plus another approximately 70 billion in undischarged Mefo bills, tax vouchers, and clearing debts. By war's end, actual indebtedness counting off-books debts approached $500 billion RM, with borrowing limited. Shortages were met by monetary expansion. The Reichsbank printed currency and discounted treasury bills. In fact, the money supply exploded, rising from 8.7 billion RM mid-1939 to about 50 billion RM by early 1945. In the final months, the Reichsbank issued huge quantities of short-term bonds for Reichstats and Weines, and Wechsel, with over 102 BN RM in such bills outstanding by late 1944. Although prices remained officially stable through 1944, the hidden inflation was rampant. Black market prices soared and Reichsmarks lost much of their value as the Third Reich printed money to cover deficits. Taxation and levies. The regime imposed onerous taxes and forced loans on Germans. In spring 1939, a new finance plan compelled businesses to accept up to 40% of payments for state contracts in the form of interest-free tax certificates. These certificates could be used to pay future taxes, effectively amounting to a forced loan to the Reich. Within 6 months, businesses had lent about 5 billion RM in this way. A massive tax on Jewish wealth, Judenverm, hence Abgabe and other confiscatory levies also contributed. By the early 1940s, roughly 2.65 billion RM of Jewish-owned assets had been sucked into the state budget.